Can you remind me if your life you'll be so kind, staring out into space, asking God to hear my case, trying to think of all things past. How long will my memory last? With purple angel, purple angel, purple angel, you're next to me.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer's Speaks Radio. I'm Lori LeBay, the host and founder of Alzheimer's Speaks. Before we get on to our show today, I always like to give you a little bit of information about us because we always have new listeners. Bottom line, I started Alzheimer's Speaks because my mom had dementia for 30 years, and I just felt it was really important to raise everyone's voice involved in this journey and to help try to connect us all around the world. Here at Alzheimer's Speaks, basically, we're an advocacy-based company, so we provide all different types of platforms. So we have more than just the radio here. We have a blog, we have a website, we do dementia chats where our panelists, those are free webinars, our panelists actually have dementia. And again, our goal is really to shift our dementia care culture from crisis to comfort all around the world. We believe that the only way that we're going to get a handle on this disease is to join forces and battle it together. And we know that that's working because we were so lucky to be recognized as the number one influencer online for Alzheimer's, according to ShareCare and Dr. Oz. And we did not do that alone. That was because of all of our listeners and our followers on our different platforms. Sharing our information. So if you like what you hear, please just push that button that you like it. Send it out to your Facebook friends, your LinkedIn colleagues, your Pinterest peeps, however you're connected, your Twitter tribe. There is somebody out there looking and trying to find resources for information. And that's all we are, is letting voices be heard with real day information of how to live with this disease. So again, I thank you all for listening. I also want to let you know that you might be our next guest on the show because we interview everybody here. People who live with dementia, family members, business professionals, researchers, advocates, movie directors. We've had teenagers on. So don't think that your voice shouldn't be heard. It needs to be heard. We need to hear from everybody what their thoughts are on this disease. Today we are going to have Brian LeBlanc with me, and he's going to be my co-host. Welcome, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, Lori. Thanks for having me today.
Do you want to tell people just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I live in Pensacola, Florida, and I was diagnosed in October of 2014 with early onset Alzheimer's. Since then, I have become a national Alzheimer's advocate, where I go throughout the country and local areas advocating about Alzheimer's. My presentation is called Alzheimer's Up Close and Personal. And that's exactly what it is. I talk about living with the disease, the good points and the bad, so as to make people aware that people under the age of 65 can also have this disease. I'm 56 years old, so I was diagnosed when I was 54, and it is possible to live with this disease. And I live with the motto of I have Alzheimer's, but it doesn't have me. And it's not always easy to do, but somehow I manage.
Well, wonderful. We're glad that you are with us today. And for those of you that don't know, September is a wonderful month because it's World Alzheimer's Month, and this disease impacts so many people. Over 131 million people are projected to be living with this disease by 2050, and every 3 seconds, somebody in the world develops dementia. So this isn't something that's going away, and so we need to get a handle on this. And I'm excited to have our guest with us today, Ann Campanella. She is the author of a memoir called Motherhood, Lost and Found. She formerly was a magazine and newspaper editor, and her writings have appeared in local and national publications from literary journals to bestsellers like A Cup of Comfort, which was a series. And her poetry has been featured on Garrison Keillor's Writer's Almanac, and twice she has received the Poet Laureate Award from North Carolina Poetry Society, which is pretty exciting. She lives on a small horse farm out in North Carolina with her family and her animals. So welcome, Ann, to the show.
Thank you so much, Lori. I am honored to be here.
Well,
and I love what you said about your mission going from crisis to comfort, because I feel like that is exactly where I was before I had my book out, as I was going through my experience, and I was in search of comfort. So I just thank you so much for everything that you're doing with your radio show and your website, and just everything that you're doing is fabulous.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, your story, I'm really interested for our audience to hear more about it, because I think I'm going to have a lot of similarities with my own mother's journey of 30 years. And I love the title, Motherhood, Lost and Found. Can you tell us a little bit on how did you pick that title?
Well, I actually went through several titles, and this one I got to because I was trying to become a mother as I was losing my mother. And so I wanted to somehow show the loss of mother through Motherhood Lost. And then finding my mother, I actually found her through the experience of living with her Alzheimer's. I found her in a new way. And at the same time, I broached motherhood as a young woman ready to have a family and struggling through miscarriages. Motherhood was something I was seeking in that way.
Okay. Well, it's a beautiful title, and I think it'll hit home with many, many people. Can you tell us why you decided to write your story? That's a big decision to make.
It is. I would say my life was going along pretty well. I thought I had everything under control. I was married to a wonderful man. I was doing the work I loved. My husband and I had bought a farm, and we were planning to bring horses to the farm. I was working as a freelance writer and teaching horseback riding lessons. And I had a plan for my life, and I thought I knew what I could expect. My husband and I had just moved back to North Carolina to be closer to my parents, and we were ready to start a family. And that's when things began to fall apart. My mother started showing signs of early Alzheimer's, and I had my first miscarriage. And the confluence of those events really shook me. Suddenly, I didn't know where my life was going. My mother had been somebody who I could count on, somebody who I trusted, someone who affirmed me. And I really thought she would be there for me, up until her 80s and 90s, and that she would be the woman that I had known all my life. So to lose parts of her as I was going through the grief of infertility was a painful and lonely experience. And as I was going through that, I was searching for other stories. I so wanted to hear somebody else who was going through something similar. I wanted that personal story, like what Brian is giving to us, the personal story of how do you live with this? How do you survive? How do you make a good life out of this kind of loss? And so I decided, being a writer, it made sense. Let me just tell my story, and maybe I could reach others who are feeling alone in their journey.
And writing is so healing. Yeah, I don't think people understand the power of the written word, and when you're going through something like this, the clarity and the release that you can get, and the empowerment and the ability to let go a little bit, but yet know that you're hopefully helping someone else along the way.
I can relate to that. I can relate to that too by using writing blog posts and so forth. When you look back on your words, it kind of opens a window. I know kind of what you're going through, both of you, because I lost my mother back in 2015 in January from Alzheimer's. I was diagnosed 3 months before that, and then we lost her. So that was anytime you lose your mother, because like you said, you want to have your mother in your life no matter how old you are. And I had her for a long time, but for about the last 15 years, she was not exactly present, if you want to call it that, because of the Alzheimer's. Is that sort of the way that you felt towards the end?
Very much, Brian. It was a kind of a confusing mix of emotions, because I was so happy to have her alive and physically in my life. And there were some special moments where she would be who she used to be. And then there was just the grief of what could have been, and, missing that relationship, knowing that she couldn't really enter into my pain as she always had in the past. That was hard. So, holding both the love, the loss, and the appreciation for the fact that she was still there was a challenge.
Oh, I believe that. I believe that. Can you tell us a little bit about what was your mom's age when she first started showing signs? I know you said it was when you guys kind of moved back, to their area. But how old was she, and what kind of signs were you seeing?
She was in her early 70s, and she may have actually had signs before we realized this, because this was 20-some years ago, and there was so much less research and medical knowledge about Alzheimer's at that time. But at first, she was just a little forgetful. She was more emotional than usual. She might start talking about somebody who had hurt her feelings. And she'd always been a sensitive person, but she would do that so much more than she used to, and she'd burst into tears over things that didn't really seem worthy of that. And she lost a sense of time and place. And that was kind of a hard thing to pin down, because she had always been really spontaneous. She was the kind of mom who you say, hey, you want to go to the fair? And she'd grab her purse and we'd be off. So it wasn't always easy to pin down, was she really the same, or was she not quite herself? But I also began to hear her say, she would say stories over and over again. There was one time that we were driving in the car, and she started talking about a friend of hers up in Lake George, New York. And by the end of our car ride, which was about an hour, she had told the exact same story 3 times. And that was when I began to know, yes, this is definitely something a little more serious than her just being forgetful.
Yeah, it's amazing when you something just hits you and go, oh gosh, it's more. How did you feel when you had that revelation?
Oh gosh, it was just devastating. Again, because she had been such a warm and affirming presence in my life. Probably the hardest thing was knowing that she was aware that she was losing some of her abilities, and seeing her angst and anxiety. That was really difficult, watching her be just in emotional pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a very difficult thing. I'm not quite sure what that noise was. It almost sounded like a buzzer to ring somebody in. We're not hearing. hearing it at the studio, and I don't know if everyone can hear that or not. Brian, were you hearing that as well?
I heard some sort of noise. I'm not really sure what it was.
Okay. Well, hopefully it goes away. That was kind of strange. Technology, we can't always control it. We just got to move on through it. So we'll continue our conversation here. How did you have other family around to support you through this? You know, was your dad still alive with caring for your mom?
Yes, I was really lucky because I have 3 siblings. One of them is disabled, so he was not able to help much. But my other 2 siblings were incredibly helpful. My father was alive, but he did not exactly get Alzheimer's, and he would fight with my mom and try to correct her, and he often made things worse. So that was kind of its own difficult challenge. But I don't know that I could have gotten through it without my siblings. They were just absolutely wonderful, each of them in their own way.
Well, that's great.
I felt the same way, being that because I live in Florida, and my mother was still living in Louisiana with 2 of my brothers and my sister. And they were basically the prime caregivers, for her until she went into a living center. And they had the burden. I don't want to say burden, but they did. They took care of all the issues that came up because living here. I was not able to get back due to jobs and so forth. But once I was diagnosed, my sister told me not to come. She says, I don't want you to be here because I don't want you to see her like she is, knowing what you have now. And she was being protective of me. Even though, she's been that way all her life. So I wish, that's the part of me that wishes that I would have been able to be there for her in the last days. But I did get to at least tell her goodbye over the phone through a speakerphone. And hopefully she heard my message and could go knowing that I was able to at least be there in some form. Were you there when she passed?
Yes, I was. That was one of the things that I really, really wanted, but I didn't know if it was even possible, because before she died, gosh, there were a couple of years where she was on the brink of death, and she was in an assisted living facility for a while, and then in a nursing home. And particularly that last year, every time I went to visit her as I was leaving, I would think, I don't know if I'm going to see her tomorrow. But we actually, we spoke about it during the last couple of months. She could hardly speak, but I asked her, I told her that I wanted to be with her, to walk her to the gate if she wanted me there. And she looked at me, and I could tell there was a real awareness in her eyes, and she nodded. She couldn't really form sentences at that time, but she nodded. And then during the very last week of her life, when she was no longer eating or drinking anything, I said the same thing to her, because I so wanted to be there at the very end, just to be present with her. And I said, Mom, do you remember us talking about me being there with you as you take these last steps? And she had not even moved for several days, and she nodded again. and kind of gave me that look. And I thought, oh my goodness. And when at the time of her death, I actually, my brother had been with her. We were kind of taking shifts, and I went to see her knowing that it was very close. And I got there about 8 o'clock in the morning, and oh goodness, she was just laying in bed. She looked kind of like a doll on the bed because she'd lost so much weight. And when I walked in, she wasn't able to even open or close her eyes. Her eyes were open, and I thought, is she still there? But she was. I could see her breath just going up and down a little bit in her chest. And within about 5 minutes, she took her last breath. So I had the sense that she actually waited for me. So I really believe in these family connections and just the love that is there. I'm sure your mother felt your presence also, Brian.
Well, it's sort of ironic that you brought that up, because my mother sang in church for 45 years. She just absolutely loved music, and when I was talking to her, my sister had told me, she says, now she's probably not going to hear you. She's just been sort of lifeless for the past 2 days. But when she heard my voice, my sister told me, she says, her eyes are moving underneath. Her eyes were closed, but she could see her eyes moving. And so I took that as a sign. And so I sang to her. And she said that even though her eyes were moving, there was just a feeling that she knew that it was me, and she understood. And I think 2 hours later, she passed away. So that, and that's why people don't understand it. Just because somebody is in the last stages, unless you're there and unless you know the situation and you know the person, you know that they are still inside. They're inside there somewhere.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the
there
beauty
are
of it.
Connections. Yes. There are these connections that are beyond words and beyond the physical sense, I believe.
Well, it's interesting. You two were lucky to be with your mom. My mom sent me away, and you were talking about connections. She wasn't able to speak anymore, but she came to me in dreams. And she had told me that, I need you gone. I need to pull the family together, and you need to be gone, and you need to continue your work. And my family thought I was nuts when I left. But my mom was a big believer in death and passing and education and getting people comfortable with death and dying ever since we were very little. And so she knew if I was there, I would take care of her. And she wanted everyone else to experience taking care of her. And it was pretty incredible what happened. And then I had 2 speaking engagements when she passed. I was in Arizona. And we were so strongly connected. And yet I thought I would touch base with my family and talk to my mom via the phone or so she could hear my voice. But instead we used video, which was really powerful. And so I was actually able to guide my family on how to care for her without physically doing it. And it was a really incredible experience. So our connections are so very, very deep. And we have to stop taking them for granted, how important they are.
And I agree that you don't have to be physically present to have those connections. And your story definitely shows that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
No, Ann, I want to kind of backtrack a little bit because we're talking end of life. But what was it like, when your mom first got diagnosed? And, I think you write about that in your book. Is there a piece that you wanted to share about when she was first diagnosed?
I would love to. She was actually diagnosed at a large hospital in North Carolina in 1997. And my brother, who lives in Charlotte, he had actually gone to visit my parents for the weekend, and we'd all been kind of going back and forth. And he came home, while he was there, he realized that the living situation was it was in such turmoil that he needed to bring my mother with him. So he brought her home, and she ended up staying with me for several days before she went into the hospital. And it was just a crazy, crazy time. She was anxious and moving constantly, opening doors, opening drawers, looking in the dishwasher. I mean, she never stopped. And at one point she went outside and there was a thunderstorm going, and I couldn't get her back in. She thought she was up north at a place where we used to vacation, and she kept saying she wanted to go see her brother. And so I finally was able to get her to come back by saying, Mom, we'll go see him later after the rain stops. And her brother had already passed away. So it just was kind of a crazy time. But the little section that I was going to read is about after she'd been in the hospital for maybe a week, and we were trying to get a diagnosis, and I went to visit her. So I'll start reading now. The first time I visit Mom at the hospital, I am horrified. She is shuffling around the corridors of the ward in a pair of purple pants I have never seen. Her face is puffy, and she can barely keep her lids lifted over her eyes. When I go up to her, she blinks at me, then looks surprised. Ann, what are you doing here? She leans back and almost loses her balance. I grab her arm to steady her, glaring at the staff. They have decided to deal with her by over-medicating her. I walk back to room 12 with her and find a man stretched out on her bed. He points down the hall. They moved her closer to the front, he says, so they can watch her. I find a sheet of notebook paper taped to the wall. Large black magic marker letters spell out Betty, my mom's name. An arrow under her name points to the right. Is this your room? I ask Mom. She shakes her head no, but follows me in. When I open the closet doors, I find her suitcase. On my way out, I stop at the nurse's desk to find out what medications my mother is on. I tell the nurses that she's so out of it, I'm afraid she's going to fall. The head nurse treats me like a child, asking in a condescending voice what my mother's name is and how long she's been here. I tell her and add that the doctor was supposed to call me and that he hasn't. After Mom was admitted, Will and I met with an intern who would be working on Mom's case. She told us they would need to test my mother, and it was likely she'd be here for a few weeks beyond the initial 5 days. She said Dr. Greco would be in touch on a daily basis. There are only a handful of patients on the ward, so I don't understand why I haven't heard anything. One of the nurses overhears my mother's name and saunters to the window. She tells me my mother has been going into other people's rooms and stealing their clothes. I defend her just as I would if she were my child. She probably doesn't know which room is hers. She's new here and she's already been moved. She gets confused easily, and I'm sure that didn't help. She would never steal anyone's clothes on purpose. She just doesn't know where she is. Unmoved by my words, the nurse tells me what happened when she confronted Mom. Your mother packed her suitcase. She brought it to the door and said she was checking out of this hotel. As she tells me the story, all the nurses in the station dissolve into laughter. I'm stunned at their lack of compassion.
Wow. It is amazing when you think, they're in a place that gets it. And then all of a sudden you realize not so much.
I know. It's crazy. Yeah, we were so relieved thinking, finally, she'll be taken care of. And then it was just kind of the opposite in the beginning. There were better things that happened, but that was just one of the stories.
Yeah, It's very frustrating because you want to trust, you want to let go of that guilt of placement that we all have, but it's really hard when you don't think the other side, gets your loved one, that they don't really understand the true needs. And Brian, did you have any experiences with your family history with similar things?
Yeah, with my grandparents. My grandfather had Alzheimer's, and he was a wanderer, but he never wandered during the day. Was always in the early morning, around 2-3 o'clock in the morning. He would get up and put his coat on top of his pajamas, put on his hat, and kiss my grandmother. Well, my grandmother was a paraplegic, and so she could not walk. She used a wheelchair, and so he would kiss her goodbye, say, "I'm going to work," and he would just walk out the door. And so my grandmother would call me, tell me he's gone. I'd jump in my car, and if I couldn't find him, I'd have to get my parents up. If we couldn't find him, we had to get the police to help. Finally, we had to put them both in a home, but he still found a way to get out of the home. From in his mind, he was going to work, and we kind of were met with the same type of reaction from the nursing staff, from the staff at the nursing home, in that we said, why is he still getting out of here? Why can't you lock the doors? And they said they didn't laugh, but it was the same type of reaction. They said, look, we can't watch everybody 24/7. We can't help it if they get out.
That's comforting.
Yeah. So we the next week we moved them to a different facility, and they took absolutely wonderful care of both of them until they both departed. But yeah, it's lack of compassion, I guess, is the best way to put it. In that, I could say lack of compassion. Maybe I would say lack of knowledge, but they're dealing with people with these dementia-related illnesses, so they should know how they're going to react. And I always tell people that I laugh at myself in things that I forget and things that I do, but I never ever make fun or laugh at others who are experiencing the same things, because there's just no reason for that. And that was I can't even begin to tell you how it must have felt for them to laugh. I know how it felt for them to not care, but that's a different feeling.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's still not comforting.
No, not a bit, not a bit.
Ann, go
I think
ahead.
sometimes. Oh, I was just going to say, I think sometimes the staff probably gets hardened to the behavior because they see it 24/7, and who knows what's going on in their lives, where they just probably can't fully emotionally connect. And I imagine if they did, it takes a special kind of person to be able to really connect. And sadly, there are a lot that just can't do that, and end up being in positions where they're not necessarily suited to be caretaking someone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When we had someone like that was staying with my parents, and she was absolutely wonderful. She did everything. She cared for them. I mean, she loved them. You could tell that she just really sincerely loved them. But my dad, with his dementia, just always accused her of stealing things, when in fact she was not. he would call the police. He knew how to dial 911, and he would call the police and wanted her arrested. And he started to become physical with her, and so that's when we knew it was time for them to be placed into a facility to where they can have more care, more people, looking on that can look after them. And so it was, but I understand the whole hardened thing, but we were lucky in the fact that the woman that took care of them was not, and so it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Now, Ann, can you tell our audience what it felt like for you to try to become kind of your mom's mom, and the emotional effect that had on you as a daughter?
Well, it was particularly difficult when I was going through the period of having miscarriages, because I so wanted to be caretaking a child and raising a family. And I thought that's what I should be doing. That was the path I was on. And suddenly I was caretaking my mother. And there was a strange age continuum. I finally did have a daughter, and I had her when I was 40 years old, and my mother was 40 years older than I was, so she had me when she was about 40, and it was like I was in the middle of a teeter-totter, and they were on either end, and both of them needed the same kind of care. And for instance, if I was diapering my mother, I knew that I needed to diaper my daughter, and I had to trim both of their nails. I had to feed both of them at times. And so it was very strange. And there was also this sort of awareness in me that knowing that one day when I am 80 and my daughter is 40, she could be going through the same thing. So there was this sort of exponential emotional impact. Every job that I did, every hug that I gave, every interaction between mother or daughter just felt amplified in that situation.
I bet. I know a lot of people, say, don't don't pretend you're their mom, or that they're your kid, or those types of things. That it's condescending, but it really, in many ways, it's not. It's a level of love in terms of, and it's a connection. And that's how I read it. When my mom needed a higher level of care, then I stepped up. I actually have a story where my mom would call me her mom. And my brother used to just hate it when she would not recognize him. And he would aren't you mad? And I'm like, somehow my mom healed her relationship with her mom through me, because she didn't have a good relationship with her mom. And she would always say, oh, and this is my mother, and she takes such good care of me. That's how she'd introduce me to her friends at the nursing home. And
that is beautiful.
It really is. And so I think so many times we are out there judging people and what they're doing and how they're doing it and what they're saying. And, every family is different. And we talk to one another different. We engage differently. And I think we have to loosen up a little bit on that. Brian, what are your thoughts?
My mother did the same thing with my sister. She called her mother, and other times she called her sister's name. She never would look at her and call her by her name as her daughter, because she never did recognize her anymore as her daughter. And but my mother also, in her later stages, went through the need for a baby, and she kept on looking for her baby. So we got her a baby doll, and she would call the baby doll my sister's name. She called her Linda, and so and I know that bothered my sister, because she was no longer recognizing her as her daughter, but recognizing the baby as her daughter, but comforting in a way that she knew that my sister was the one that was taking care of her. So the stories are similar in a way.
Yeah, I think it's about us getting our egos out of the way, and just knowing that if they're comfortable and content, that should really be the most important piece. Not if they get the name right. Ann, you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. It just Brian's story reminded me of a time when my mother, she too went through a period of seeming to want a baby. And there was one time I had gone through a couple of miscarriages that I had not told her about, because I knew that she couldn't quite take it in. And one time on the phone, I was talking to my sister, who actually lived close to my mom. And my sister said, Mom keeps talking about the fact that she's having a miscarriage. And I was just kind of amazed by that, because we hadn't talked about it, but she has an incredible intuition. And again, those connections that we were talking about earlier, I think they're there, and they're deeper than any of us can understand sometimes. And it's really a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I used to joke at the nursing home. They're like, how does your mom always know what's going on? And maybe this was happening with your mom too. I mean, it could be intuition, but I would always tell them, my mom was always a good eavesdropper before she got the disease. I don't think that went away. She literally had ears around her body and eyes. She just could pick up on every little thing that was going on, and she'd store it. That's just what she did. Yeah. And
that's incredible.
Yeah, it really is, because things that you would want her to remember, she couldn't. But, it was, I don't know if it's maybe part of her value system, in terms of how that got tucked away and how that was held, or, I mean, it's just hard to say. But it was something that she always did. And so, they always say that, I went to Gary LeBlanc's seminar the other day, and he was talking about our kind of our roadways, in our past, and to things that we've done all of our life. The road is very heavy, and it's wide, and it's very solid. And the road to something that just happened a little while ago, we've gone down it once, and we might not have gone back. And so it's thin, and it's harder to find. And so maybe that was just one of those patterns that she's just got a really solid connection to, or that my mom did at the time. But, it would always give us a chuckle. But, those moments of clarity and those moments of connection, you just never know when they're going to pop out. And they're really so precious.
Although I'm in my early stages, I go through the same things, in that I wish I would remember certain things that I don't. But the things that I do remember make absolutely no sense whatsoever. My wife and I love watching Jeopardy, and we'll watch it, and I just call out these answers, and and I'm not bragging, but 75% of the time, the ones that I do answer are correct. And she'll look over at me, and she says, you can't even remember what you had for breakfast, but yet you can answer this Jeopardy question. So it makes no rhyme or reason when it comes to this, because we have no control over what we remember and what we don't remember. and I can speak for that. But I also know that the part that I try not to think about is, what both of you have gone through with your mother and what I've gone through with my mother. I know that my family's going to go through the same thing with me. And that's a very, very hard road to go down. So I don't try to think of it, but I just, I live for right now, which is very important. And that's what both your mothers did, I'm sure, is just live in the now for as long as they were able to. And and I think that's a wonderful, beautiful thing that they were able to do.
Well, Brian, I admire so much your decision to be public about this and to really embrace who you are, where you are, and the fact that you're on this journey. I think it's really brave, and it's just an amazing, admirable thing that you're doing. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you coming and God, I know it's not easy, to talk about, a loved one that you've lost, especially lost to this disease, because I mean, all three of us have gone through that, and it's not easy. I don't care how long it's been. There are times where I know that it's more difficult. I'm going to be speaking next month at two different walks, two different Alzheimer's walks here in the Gulf Coast area. And the first day that I speak is on November 12th, which would have been my parents' wedding anniversary. And then the next day, I will be speaking at another one, which would have been my mother's birthday. So it's going to be, it's going to be hard. It's going to be a hard day. But, the only thing that I can think of is that she's going to be there with me. And that's what's going to get me through it. And y'all were lucky to be able to feel your mother's presence, in you, within you. I didn't really have that, but I wish I would have been able to experience what the two of you had. Could you tell us the name of your book one more time?
Sure. It's Motherhood, Lost and Found. And Brian, I wanted to mention that connection, and I wonder if Lori has had this too. I feel like it gets reignited every time I speak about her or write about her. I'm sort of in the midst of writing blogs and press releases and various things around my book. But each time I do, there's sort of a sacred quality that seems to be connected with my relationship and my love for her. And so just to give you a spark of hope and comfort, I believe when your family is doing the same thing and caring for you, that connection will remain. And again, the fact that you are okay with where you are, even though it's difficult, and maybe you're not okay all the time, that's a gift that you're giving your family, and they will hold on to that through the difficult days. And I just, again, I stand back and just say thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, and I get the same thing. I've always said my mom and I were in this together. I don't feel like I do any of this alone. In fact, when she was dying, and it was like 10 minutes before I had to go on stage, I'd called and I said, "Okay, Mom," and this is kind of how we talk to one another, so don't be offended. And I said, "I expect your ass on stage with me, so get ready." And I got on stage, and it was like a bolt of lightning hit me. I almost fell over, but there was like an energy source that just hit me. And at that moment, I didn't know if she was there or if she had passed, but I had to get up and speak for 2 hours and do my thing.
Wow.
And
Oh, boy.
and so the second time I had to speak, I talked to her right before, and we were actually on that one we were doing the last rites via video with me, and I said, "Ma, I need to hear, but you can't come in with that kind of power." I said, "Be a little more subtle next time, and I'll be okay."
Oh, wow.
So
Back off a bit, Mom.
Yep. So yeah, I think our connections are very, very strong. I wanted to just ask you, Ann, if there was a special memory about your mom that you'd like to share with our audience.
There are so many, but I will just give you one, and that is my mother was a writer also, and so we shared a love of words and language. And over the past couple of years, I've been homeschooling my daughter, and I taught her and a friend a writing class and helped them publish a few books of their own. And one day I was just out taking a walk, and that connection just hit me in a very physical way. And I just felt this intense joy. And I realized it was my mother's joy of writing that she had passed on to me and was passing to my daughter. And it was just an incredible experience. And it was several years after she had passed away, but it just reminded me of the power of sharing things that we love and connecting over them.
Wow, very neat. Very neat. Now, Ann, can you tell people how they can get in contact with you and how they can purchase your book?
Sure. People can contact me through my website, www.anncampanella.com. And my book is on Amazon. It was just released on Kindle last week, and there's also hard copies available. And my last name is spelled Campanella.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I really appreciate this conversation and you sharing your book with the world. I think it's a big step and will help many. So again, the name of the book is Motherhood Lost and Found by Ann Campanella, and that's Campanella, Ann Campanella, Motherhood Lost and Found. And you can find the book on Amazon and both Kindle. You can also go directly to Ann's website, which is just her name, anncampanella.com. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, Ann.
Thank you, and thank you, Brian. You both are wonderful.
Yep, Brian's pretty exceptional.
Thank you.
And you added some great insights to the conversation here today. So I thank you very much, too, for taking time to be with us. Before we sign off, I just want to remind people, if you live in Minnesota and you are in need of help as a caregiver, you might want to look into Good Sam's caregiving coaching that they have. And you can call 605-679-1765. That's 605-679-1765. Or you can email care.coach@good-sam.com. If you're going to be in Indiana, I'd love to see you. I'm going to be down in Fort Wayne on October 19th and in Maryville on the 20th. You can just go to my website to get more information for the conferences that I'll be speaking at. And I also wanted to just give a shout out to one of our colleagues here on Alive in Social for their show, and because I just think it's a fun, kind of neat show that we can all take advantage of. Rachel Perrin is a culinary director for Kowalski's Markets, And along with her producer and sidekick, Adam Lee, they're joined by foodtastic friends and colleagues to chat about seasonal flavors, favorite foods, trending topics in nutrition, and everything yummy for your tummy. If you've got a question of, what's for dinner tonight, their podcasts are only 10 to 15 minutes per episode. So they're really perfect when you're trying to figure out what to make. And you can also go to Kowalskis.com and get a full list of menus there as well. But, anything helps in this fast-paced life that we have. Some of our recent shows that we've had on, you might want to go back and listen to. You can listen to several years of shows. But our past ones, we talked about the life coaching for caregivers. We also talked about dementia being complicated by abuse. We had Deborah Schaus on talking about her new book, Connecting in the Land of Dementia. And there's a new documentary that's coming out, excuse me, soon. And then we also talked about the Bob and Diane Fund, which is a grant that's going to be closing here pretty soon for visual storytelling that you might be interested in. Later this week, I will be posting the dementia chats that we recorded this morning. Fascinating conversation about getting diagnosed, what doctors do and don't do to help families. And let's see, I've got some coming up premieres of His Neighbor Phil. Excuse me, I've got the crud. I've been trying to do really good, but I'm talking too much right now. I'll be at Hopkins.
You did good so far.
Hopkins High School, October 30th, and then I'll be down in Memphis, Tennessee, in November. So with that, I'm going to close before I choke, and we will catch you all soon. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Hi, I'm Lori LeBay, and I wanted to tell you about Alzheimer's Speaks, which is another great podcast. You see, my own mother lived with dementia for 30 years, and I felt lost. Did you know every 3 seconds someone in the world is being diagnosed with dementia? Odds are it's going to hit your families too. We want to help you connect to services, products, tools, research, and stories so you can be prepared. Please subscribe to Alzheimer's Speaks on your favorite podcast platform.